So I'm joined today by Lucy Owens. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Emma. Lovely to be here with you. Love talking about
Good.
this topic.
Me too. I suspect we might have to kind of rein ourselves in rather than not have enough not have enough conversation. We're going to be talking today about all things style and how style kind of plays into personal brand. But
hmm
before we get into that, do you want to give us a little bit of an introduction to you and your business and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I'm a personal stylist. I'm a personal style and image specialist. I'm the founder of Style Risers, and I absolutely love empowering women through their style. And I really got into this, Emma, because I just loved the power of clothing when I was a little girl. And I ended up going into fashion and then went on many different roundabouts of my career. But in 2019, I started my business Style Risers and have really been focused on helping women elevate, not just their confidence, but their brand and their presence through style.
That's so cool. I love that. And just to take a step back, because you mentioned the kind of, I guess, the meandering journey, which, to be honest, I think most of us have been on. Certainly, I have to get to this point today. But part of that journey was actually through marketing, wasn't it? Kind of marketing and PR.
Absolutely, yes. So I my degree was in business, majored in marketing, and to be honest, I guess I chose that degree because I didn't really know what else to do. I had an interest in fashion at that time, but I guess it was just a career that I didn't know what sort of, what would a career look like in that field. I guess some very well-meaning parental advice, was around to do something more stable. And so my initial career was in branding, PR, and marketing. I was very, very lucky though that I was able to work for fashion brands, and so I had that connection still to something I was really, really passionate about. And the branding and the marketing sides were very fun, creative, sides to that industry. So that was great. But I then did go off into other, organizations outside of that sort of industry, still in marketing, in corporate communications. And I guess that was where I really realized that wasn't fulfilling me.
It's so hard, isn't it? And it's a topic that comes up a lot. The idea that, well, often you're sort of 17, probably, aren't you, when you're picking a degree, that you somehow know what you're going to want to do with the rest of your life. It's kind of a bit of a crazy idea. I think it's
It
it's
is.
it's a rare person who really knows from the get-go and has that, I guess, kind of idea of a calling. So many more people, it is kind of trying a few different things and trying to figure out, and also, as you said, that sort of well-meaning parental advice of what's considered stable. I suspect that was probably a lot of why I did what I did as well, of kind of going down a more sort of business route and not doing some of the more creative stuff that was actually far more interesting to me.
Absolutely. I actually read a quote from someone the other day, and they said that, think back to your childhood and what were you really passionate about? What did you love? And that's probably the thing that you're really good at. And if you there are so many different ways I think that we can, have businesses now, or there's so many different types of roles that exist now in organizations. And for me, when I think back, it was clothes. Like I just got a lot of joy and passion out of dressing up my dolls and playing dress ups when I was younger. So it's funny, sometimes I think when we feel a bit lost in our careers, sometimes we just need to go back and think to what did I enjoy when I was younger?
Yeah, it's a really good point, isn't it? Because I think sometimes we try and sort of logic our way out of some of that stuff that we actually innately know, but for whatever reason, parents say or society says or whatever, that shouldn't be the thing that we want to do. Yeah, but
Mm.
I think it's true. It's in there. It's in there somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. And you'll keep getting, I think, signs of it, or you'll keep getting a message about it until you follow it. At least, I certainly found that.
Yeah, 100% agree with that, very much so. A very simple question, but I know it's going to be a very detailed answer because it's not a simple thing. But why is style important?
Yes, it's a really interesting question, and there's so many different aspects to it. It's important for women. I work with women. The biggest reason I see why it's important is because it helps us feel confident. And we know that, so there's been a lot of studies done. Adam Galinsky was one of the people who did one of the first studies into the way that our clothing affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act. And he realize that there's a very, very strong connection between the clothes that we put on and also the association that we have with that item of clothing and how we then go through our day. And that has a name that is called enclothed cognition. It actually affects the way that we think, our cognitive abilities. Often, for me, and I know for a lot of women as well, sometimes putting on a blazer, you will feel different. There is that sense of having something on that makes us feel powerful. And I think when we have the confidence, then we are able to put ourselves forward. We, go for that promotion, or we speak up so that our ideas can be heard more. So, from a career perspective and a career building perspective, I think the style is so incredibly important, first and foremost, because it gives us confidence. Second, that's really the internal aspect. And then I guess next to that is the external aspect of style, and that is the way that other people will perceive us and the way that it can help give you a step up into, whether that is a new role, a promotion, getting a great project or secondment handed to you. I think we have an incredible ability to leverage our style so that we can signal to other people that we're serious about our job. This is our values. This is, who we are. And in a very competitive landscape, which it is what we're seeing at the moment, it can really help us stand out and be memorable to somebody else.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And I love that. So it was enclosed cognition.
Cognition.
That's really cool. I do think it's so interesting, isn't it? Because I think it's one of those topics that sometimes people can sort of make that throwaway comment that sometimes it's a little bit frivolous,
Yes.
or as women, like, you shouldn't really care about that stuff, it's not important. But like you said, I think the impact, particularly on how you feel, is absolutely huge, and actually can't be underestimated, and the link between that and confidence. But is that something you come up against, that people saying, oh, it's a bit frivolous, it's something like that shouldn't matter?
Yeah, it is. And I think sometimes that can be, if we have heard that growing up as well, that can also
Mhm.
be a bit of a belief that then we need to realize, well, is that really serving us in our lives today? It's rare that I would have ever met a woman who doesn't feel impacted by what she wears. And I think if we think about the impact that it does have on how we feel, and not just how we feel emotionally, but the impact it has on our performance, that has also been proven through many, many studies. How can we say it's frivolous? It's something that really can, like you would put the right foods in your body, just as an
Mm.
athlete does in order to fuel their performance. Clothing is something that we put on our bodies, and at the end of the day, it fuels performance. So I find it, very difficult to think that it's a frivolous thing when we think about the impact that it does have.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. I just think it's one of those things that often is kind of floating around, isn't it? When you start talking about things like this sort of underlying idea that, yeah, it shouldn't matter, but as you say, it does, and it's so innately kind of tied to how you feel about yourself, and then confidence that comes from that. I think even just in, very low key examples, like, even if you've got the flu for a few days and you've spent a few days really unwell, you haven't washed your hair, you haven't put any makeup on,
Yeah.
you've had a tracksuit on, and you just within yourself feel terrible. And sometimes just even, although you still don't feel well, just that getting up, getting dressed, doing your hair, putting your makeup on, it does actually lift you and make you feel better. I think it's just a small example, but it's probably the same principle underlying, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, it's a really interesting, again, like some studies they've done where if we wake up and we're feeling in a bit of a down mood that day, for example, often then we can dress to match that mood. Maybe we just go, oh, I'm just going to put on something really comfortable. And, we sort of match the way that we're feeling. And what they have found that to do is it will exacerbate that mood. The more powerful way to dress is to go, okay, I am feeling like this right now. I'm a little bit down, or I don't have a lot of energy. How would I like to feel today? And to dress to match how you want to feel. Because once you do then put on that clothing, it could be as simple as choosing, a color that uplifts you. And that will actually impact on your mood throughout that day. So it seems so easy, and it is in some ways, that we can really help ourselves feel positive and feel ready to tackle the day just by dressing up for what we want to achieve and feel that day.
Yeah. I think one of the other myths that I often think sort of floats around this topic is that the idea of style is somehow innate, and you've either got it or you haven't, and it's something that you can't learn. I'd imagine that one also comes up a lot.
It's such a myth, Emma. It really, really is. And I think particularly what I have found with women is sometimes I think there's a little bit of feeling a bit of shame around that they don't get style, and that they almost like this thing that I should get it. I should be able to dress. Well, actually, there's a lot of things that make up your style. There's a lot of different aspects. And even though I loved style, I was interested in fashion, and I worked in the industry for many years, and I could always pull an outfit together. When I went and trained as an image consultant, oh my gosh, I mean, there was so much I didn't know. And what I have, that is now what I have, luckily, be able to teach women, because, it is about the colors that you choose to wear that make you look your best, and the body shape and all of that. And they are principles. They really are principles. And once you understand, you know how to get dressed, right? And everything becomes very simple from there. But we are not taught this. And unless maybe you might have had someone who was very stylish in your family, or who helped you. And yes, some people do have it innately. We're just not taught about what looks good on us, right? Because we're all so individual. And the retail industry, particularly having worked in there, they're not particularly interested in teaching us. Okay, they, at the end of the day, they are for profit and they want to make money. And so, we actually, I think, it's just such a gift to ourselves when we can learn how to look like the best version of us, and then that we can make really informed choices.
It's such an interesting point, and it's one that I hear a lot, that phrase of, I feel like I should just know how to do it. And I don't know if it is something that perhaps women do tend to feel more so than men. I don't know. My sort of feeling is that it's probably that way. And I think it is one of those things that, we just kind of think, oh, I should know, I should innately know how to do this. And so you say, unless you've actually had someone in your life who's helped you with that, and going into a shop or store is probably not going to help, because at the end of the day, they just want to sell you things, whether they suit you or not.
Yes. And sometimes we can feel that that's a solution to the problem, that I'm going to go and buy more clothes. But that is not a solution to the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea of kind of, I guess, the phrase of sort of personal branding is something that has really kind of grown in prevalence, and I talk about it a little bit in terms of what I do on the career side, and I know for you also, obviously, it's a big message within what you do. How do you help people to sort of define that, to kind of end up with something that feels authentic to them? I liked your phrase before about the best version of me.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So one of the things I think with personal branding, and, this was something that I've also had to, I think any business owner, you as well, Emma, we need to work on our personal brand. And I think one of the first things that also then feeds into style is getting clear on who you are and your values. And, I often will ask clients, what do you want people to think of you when they see you? And that should be something that really conveys to someone else what you're about, what your values are, what your personality is, so that they get a sense of who you are. And once we can get really clear on that, that's really the first step. Then what we want to do is we want to actually be able to match clothing to suit that. And I actually have a process where I help people match their clothing, particularly to those personality and values. And I do have a quiz if anyone wants to go through the quiz, because it just helps them understand their personality and what are the clothing styles that are going to match that. Because I think that's a really important part of it. And I think a strong personal brand has to be based on the authenticity of who you are. People will connect with that authenticity. It will set you apart from others. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that people with strong personal brands, what you see is what you get, right? Like, yes, they might have, a sort of a public profile, but we get a sense of who they are. And very much they will also have a strong sense of how they look and how they dress. And it's all very individual to them. There's not necessarily a playbook of how you need to look. It just needs to be authentic.
Is there an inbuilt challenge there for some people? Because I totally agree with you in terms of being able to differentiate yourself, but by the definition of the word, you're then sort of separating yourself from the pack. Is
Yep.
that sometimes a bit kind of challenging, or kind of feels a bit of a bit confrontational for some people?
Yeah, I guess it really comes back to your goals.
Mm,
And I think sometimes differentiating yourself from the pack, and there's a lot of things that go into that, your particular industry, organization, cultural norms, and
yeah.
those sorts of things. And I think, if you're clear on your goals and that there is a clear reason why you're choosing to differentiate yourself and it aligns with that, then, that's the path you want to take. But I agree that sometimes it can be confronting,
Mm,
and there's a lot of inner work that goes along with style. It's not just about changing the external. I think it is about also growing internally and being able to embrace who we are. And sometimes that needs to be done in small steps versus
yeah.
one, huge change, which often just isn't really a long lasting type of change.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's so interesting, isn't it? I think that is kind of the ultimate, isn't it? That the outside is truly a reflection of the inside, as it were.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I have found, when I work with people, that we are not changing who they are. We are creating a style that does mirror who they are inside. And yes, we're often elevating to new styles and pieces of clothing, but it's not about changing who someone is at all.
Mm. Just as you say, elevating, it just kind of made me think, is it something that you find people often do or want support on when they get to a certain level, and perhaps they're wanting to get to that next level? Is it part of that elevating their career more broadly?
I think that is a very big reason for people
Mm,
who do want to elevate their style and image. Yeah, so they either they may have moved into a position recently and they want to make sure that they are reflective of that position they're currently in, or they would be wanting to go for a promotion into a higher level role.
mm. One thing that I'm sure has had an impact, well, on everyone over the last few the last few years, the shift to working from home, obviously more online conversations like this, and also I think just a more casual office environment as well. Like even businesses that perhaps would have been very sort of suited and booted back in the day, you don't see many gentlemen wearing ties anymore. You don't see so many ladies in suits as well. How has that impacted? Have you had people coming to you that have been, I guess, struggling to kind of find their groove in a more casual world?
Yeah, absolutely. Workplaces, I think, has probably been one of the most dramatic shifts. We really had pre-COVID, COVID, and now there is post-COVID. And workplaces have really changed. I'm yet to sort of know of many workplaces who have gone back to pre-COVID dress codes.
Mm,
They have moved on a little bit from what we saw during COVID, where, we became very, very casual and a lot of us were working from home. We have, many people have stepped back into hybrid ways of working and going into the office some days. but they're not back at those previous dress codes. So I think there's still a lot of grey around. A lot of companies don't have really defined dress codes now, and there's a lot of leeway. There's also a lot of room for self-expression, which is great,
Hmm.
but that can also be a source of confusion, as in what is appropriate now, what do I wear? And a lot of people are wanting wardrobes that are a little bit more fluid so that you can get more wear out of them across different aspects, whether you're working from home or going into the office, versus just having, the suits and this is my working
Yeah.
life outfit, and this is what I wear on my time off.
Yeah, it's funny. I think back to when I worked in an office, and I absolutely had to. I had a work wardrobe and a non-work, and the two would never cross.
Yeah, and what we're seeing now is a lot of crossover of that. And,
Yeah.
some things which, if we think historically, you might have had some organizations, tech organizations or some of those more creative, forward-thinking organizations where denim and T-shirts and so forth are, were very, very commonplace. Now we're seeing a lot more organizations where denim and sweaters and those sorts of things are far more commonplace. And one of the biggest things I think in casual organizations is we really, it's still our professional brand and we're still representing an organization. So even when we're casual, we still want to make sure that we are representing ourselves in a professional light and we're not going in dressed in casual kind of weekend wear. We're doing casual professional wear, but we're seeing a prevalence of that across many, many organizations now.
Yeah, and I would imagine even at the organisational level, there's probably some kind of wrestling there, and they're trying to work out what does that sort of new new version of a dress code, what does that actually look like? You see it flash up on LinkedIn occasionally of I don't know whether it's shorts in the summer or something like that. Like where's the line?
And it's a tricky line. I think that we need to use common sense, Emma. So, you know,
Common
uh,
sense not so common anymore, though, is it, Lucy? I think if COVID taught us anything, it's that common sense actually isn't very common.
it's true, isn't it? But if I think, for example, shorts above the knee, flip flops, tank tops, anything that really is considered, what you'd be flopping about, for example, on the weekend or so forth. One, those sorts of clothes don't necessarily prime your mind for the office. And two, they're really not a great representation of your professional self and most likely the organization. So the other thing that I have really noticed with casual attire is that there is a huge amount of difference between industry and company, and what one company might consider casual and another company might not be. So I think it's always worthwhile to have a look at what's the norm in the place that you are working.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You mentioned tech before, and it's the one that my mind always goes to, probably because they are typically the more casual, and yeah, particularly in summer shorts, t-shirts, trainers, as you say, flip flops. It's interesting. I actually wanted to talk to you about a post that you I saw you make this morning about working from home and how you actually dress on the days that you're working from home. And I'm like you, I work from home full time, so it really has an impact if kind of day in, day out. Talk to me a bit about working from home and how you approach that.
Yeah, yeah. So I think one of the things that I personally noticed was, and this is from, personal experience, when I was dressing in a way that was, let's say more weekend where sometimes, I would leave my slippers on and, I wasn't necessarily dressing in a way that I felt so work, or in work attire. I
Mm.
noticed that I wasn't as productive that day. My mind was sort of different. I just didn't feel on. So now I really do have, I guess, some rules for myself, around dressing when I am at home, and I want to make sure that I am um, putting myself into work mode. And for me, that means that, I'm neat and tidy, my hair and makeup is done. I'm not necessarily in what I would wear on the weekend, although I'm still often very casual at home. Today I've got pants and a sneaker on, but I've also got a blazer on, and that makes me feel smart. And it is about, I want to look in the mirror and woman, and this is the way I show up for myself. And particularly, I'm still doing a lot of meetings during the day with clients and, partners and so forth. I want to make sure that I show up and I'm showing a sign of respect to them that this is an important meeting for me.
A really key thing you said there, show up for yourself. And I think that's such a big part of it, isn't it? And maybe that's the bit that sometimes gets missed if someone just thinks, oh, I'll just leave my tracksuit on. No one else can see it, but I know I've got a tracksuit on.
Right. Yeah. And I've actually coached
I haven't, by the way. I'm not wearing a tracksuit. I wouldn't do that to you, Lucy.
I've actually coached a lot of clients on this around, when they're not, because I think we also have to have a different level of motivation when we're at home, right? Whether you've got your own business or you're in corporate, we do in a way need to motivate ourselves a bit more. We don't necessarily kind of have that group setting and that office setting that helps with that. And I've coached a lot of women where their motivation has felt really low. And when I've asked them about some of their habits around dressing at home, that has been a really big awakening for them, that is what is a lot of the time impacting their level of motivation.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading that post today, and the bit that made me smile was not wearing your slippers and wearing actual shoes. I've been struggling with this over winter because I get a bit cold during the day, and I've had kind of proper clothes on, but then sort of up boots on under the table.
Yeah.
And I notice it. Like I've stopped. I've gone back to. I mean, they're trainers, but I've got shoes on because it does make you feel different. The other one I noticed, because I actually don't do it, is you said that you should put your accessories on too. I did it today because I was talking to you, but I don't normally do that. Actually, I normally only put them on when I leave the house. I'm like, actually, no, I'm going to start doing that too.
Well, it makes you feel complete.
Yeah.
Right. That, and often that's what it's about. It doesn't, when we put on a pair of pants and a top or whatever, yes, we've got dressed. But if we want to actually, sort of elevate that outfit, a lot of the time it can be just simple little tweaks, and that can often be the accessories. And particularly if we're on Zoom, having an accessory is a really, really great way to give people, a sense of who you are, showcase some personality and just be a bit of fun. So I think when we actually take the time to just put on, like you've got Emma today on, a beautiful necklace. One, it is something that it's a talking point. I think it was one of the first things that I noticed about you, gives me a sense of your personality, and you feel like you've actually got a complete outfit on.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? It's the difference between being dressed and actually having a complete outfit on.
Yeah. And we feel different.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on being on Zoom there, and that was something else that I wanted to mention, because that's such a shift for the vast majority of people, isn't it? Like we just never would have really communicated like this back in the day. Any other tips that you have for kind of Zoom specifically and that sort of online conversation? You mentioned the accessories, but anything else that you think's important?
Yeah. I think one of the big ones is just to be mindful of what's behind you. So, if we can obviously blur our backgrounds now, but if you don't blur your background and you do have something behind you, make sure that feels also like it's a good representation of your professional self, and be mindful of what that color is. So if you've got a white background and you're wearing white, it's going to be very difficult for you to have any sort of presence. White can absolutely be okay if you've got some sort of color to your background. Otherwise, I sort of say tend to go for something that is like a medium value sort of color. So something where it's not super, super light and not necessarily super, super sort of bright or dark, because sometimes they can come across as quite heavy on screen. And then I think the other thing is, dress in a way that if someone sees you online, whether it's your LinkedIn profile or they have met you in real life before, then show up online in a way that is congruent with that.
Yes. Shouldn't need to say it, should you? But you do need to say it.
We do. Like, we have, as humans, we actually like consistency. And if we're not consistent, whether that is not being consistent with your LinkedIn profile or perhaps how I've met you before, or even just the assumption of what I think you are going to be like, what you wear and the way that you show up is going to have a really big impact on my impression of you. And I am often going to believe what I see more than what I hear. So the way that the way that someone sees you and interprets what you're wearing has a really, really big impact on their impression of you. And we often talk about in style and image first impression. That's super important. It's sticky. It's hard to reverse it. But there's also second, third, fourth, fifth, there's every single other impression after that we create. And we create that every time we are in front of someone and meet someone again. And that, we often have 2 or 3 interviews with the same person, for example. So we should be showing up in a way that is consistent with that.
It's such a key point, isn't it? And I think, even just as you said it, I can, picture in my head times when I'm like, is that the same person?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just on your point of consistency there, something that I suspect is a little bit of a touchy subject sometimes for some people when their LinkedIn photo is either very out of date or they look significantly different. How do you approach that sort of conversation with someone?
Yeah. So I think definitely having an up-to-date photo on LinkedIn where we know companies go and recruiters are going to have a first look at you is incredibly important. And I think it's really important that we can recognize that when we do have an old photo or something that really doesn't represent who we are today, that it can erode trust that people have when they do meet you, because they're going to have a sense that you haven't been wholly transparent.
Yeah.
So I think it's about recognizing that let's embrace who we are today. Get yourself a good professional photographer, get some headshots done. That is not a really big investment. They normally cost a couple of $100s, but even just sometimes going through that process of getting some new headshots, putting those onto your profile really does help you, I think, build up your confidence and help you feel, I think, just clearer about your positioning and who you are in the market.
Yeah, it's interesting. And as you were saying that, I totally agree with your point on trust. It can be quite jarring when you look at someone's picture and then you sort of jump on a call and it's like, oh gosh, that looks like a totally different person. And I'm sure the reasons that they've done it are all quite innocent. And if you mention trust, they'll be like, oh gosh, no, like I just don't like my hair these days or whatever it might be. But the impact is actually quite a bit more significant. And I think also sometimes it crops up. I've had this conversation a few times recently with ladies who perhaps, I'm in my late 40s, but maybe that sort of mid 50s, where they're conscious perhaps of a little bit of ageism, or maybe thinking, gosh, am I going to be judged fairly in the marketplace? So I understand why it happens, but it's that, again, it goes back to first impression, doesn't it? Because the first thing you think when you meet the person is, that wasn't their current photograph, or they don't look like their photograph. And so even a reason which you can completely understand the genuine reason for it, the impact is, I think, far more severe than they actually realize.
I agree. And I think for women in particular, I work with a lot of women in their 40s and 50s, and they do have that sort of fear. But at the end of the day, you've got to show up to an interview on Zoom or in person, and you are the age that you are.
Yeah.
And so we do know that there is more bias, that women are held to higher standards around this, and bias for women age bias starts at around 40. It starts a lot later for men. Having said that, as women, what can we do? We can make sure that our style speaks to the relevance and that we know who we are today. This is who we are, and that we have a style that we feel really, really confident about, because that is also then going to impact the energy and the way that you are able to sell yourself when you are in those interviews. I think it is far more damaging to your brand to have a photo of you in your 30s and you are now in your 50s. And often that photo is not a professional photo. It
No.
looks outdated.
Yeah.
And all of those things are going to have a really, really big impact on your brand.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I think it's part of my ethos when I'm working with people as well. Is if you have a sense of what you think the potential objection is going to be, don't wait for it to come. Lean into it, and put your own spin on that narrative. So instead of being worried that perhaps I'm going to be judged harshly because I'm in my late 40s and maybe I'm too old, and lean into that. Look at all the experience I've got. Look at look at
Mm.
the challenges I've come through, look at the problems I've solved, look at the benefit of all of that experience, as opposed to trying to hide the fact of how old I am. And I think it's two sides of the same coin, essentially, isn't it? Of how you're
Yeah.
presenting the outside and the experience part of it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, the other thing I wanted to touch on, and you did just mention it there, is interviewing. And I think pretty much I would struggle to think of any person I've ever spoken to who doesn't get nervous for an interview. I think everyone gets nervous, and I think that's just is human nature. And I also think it's a good thing because a bit of adrenaline probably makes you deliver your best. And as well as preparing for the questions, people often have questions about what they're going to wear and how do I present myself. And particularly, I find if it is a more casual workplace, how smart do I go in the interview? I don't want to look totally out of place, but I do
Yeah.
want to put my best foot forward. What advice do you give to people in that scenario?
Yes, yes. So I think at the end of the day, organizations are looking for someone who is going to fit within that culture. So I think it's really important that you can do some homework on the company before your interview so that you, as much as you can, get a sense of how are people dressing on a day-to-day basis in that organization, and aim to dress a little bit smarter than that.
Mm.
You don't want to dress so smart that you look out of place, because it will be difficult for them to get a sense of how or that you are going to fit in. So for if you're going into an organization where most people are sort of dressed in maybe jeans or slacks and a shirt, going in a very formal suit with a tie nowadays really can make you seem a little bit out of touch. A suit might absolutely still be appropriate for men, but there's no tie.
Yeah.
And then, just a shirt. And for women, I think it's just about being, really smart. I often don't, I don't coach a lot of my clients to wear suits to interviews, but we'd be looking at smart separates, and it's what they feel most confident in. So it might be a blazer with a pair of pants, but it's not a matching, sort of suit, and it's a nice blouse. Jeans can be appropriate for some interviews. I once worked in a very casual clothing company. It was outdoor wear. And I wore a smart pair of jeans to that interview because I knew it was going to be appropriate for that organization. So I think you really do need to do your homework. It is always better to be a little bit overdressed than underdressed, but you don't want to be dressed in a way where they can't see you fitting into that organization and which looks really out of touch with their culture.
Mm. It's a really interesting point, that, and just as you were saying that, the question in my mind was, because I agree with you. Obviously, you want the job, you want to show that you fit the culture, but the question in my mind was, well, what if I don't fit the culture? What if I'm actually not presenting my authentic self in order to look like I fit the culture? I can imagine someone asking that question in response. I know what my response would be to that, but what's your response in that scenario?
Is it the right organization for you?
Yeah, I think it becomes self-selecting, doesn't it? If you're
I agree.
And I think it's part of the research that someone can do before an interview, that if you're looking at these pictures, presuming that they are real pictures and not stock images on the website of people very corporate, grey suits, and you're thinking, gosh, that's not me, then yeah, maybe it's not the right organization for you.
Well, you'll struggle. You'll
Yeah.
struggle in that sort of environment. And I think again, LinkedIn is a really great place to go and do some research. Have a look at what are any of their team days or meetings or so forth been like, and what do people look like. Go and do a bit of research on the people that you're interviewing with. How do they dress, to get a sense of it? But yes, I think we want to be able to show up in a way where there is that intersection of the company or the brand's sort of values and organization and our values.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I mean, that's the kind of I was going to say unicorn. I think that's harsh because it's not actually that rare. It just takes a bit of work to actually uncover that. And I think
Absolutely.
there's, yeah, plenty of organizations out there where someone can be themselves, they can be authentic, but there's that intersection, as you say, between their values and the organization, and ideally some sort of sense of purpose. I do think that's
Yeah.
probably one of the things that's changed so much, as and perhaps the clothing element is a reflection of that over the last kind of 10, 15, 20 years. The idea, certainly when I started out, that I would, be picking an organization based on my values, like that never would have occurred to me at all. I'd have been like, what? I don't even know what my values are. It's a very different world, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a very different world. And I think that is also reflected through clothing now, that we have a lot more self-expression.
Hmm.
And I think we value that self-expression a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that quiz before, Lucy. If people are interested to do that, it's on your website, is it?
Yes, absolutely. And I can also send you a link. But yes, it's
Cool. I'll pop
a
that.
style archetype quiz. So it helps you identify your primary archetype. And that can be, yeah, just really useful to understand then how to match that to clothing.
Nice. Final question, Lucy. It's always the final question here on the podcast. What do you know now that you wish you knew then?
Yes, I was pondering on this question, Emma, and it's a really interesting one. When I was I started doing a lot of mindset work in my 30s. I read my first, let's say, personal development book, Anatomy of Success, and I was in my early 30s. And ever since then, I'm 45 now. I've read hundreds of personal development books, and I'm very, very interested in that space. But I guess what I wish I knew when I was particularly in my 20s was, I made a lot of decisions based on the feeling I wasn't good enough, or I made decisions around my career sort of more based on fear. I actually wish I had started the mindset work a lot earlier. I had mentors in my 20s for my career and so forth, but it was more around, I guess, building up the practicalities of your skills in a working sense. And I actually really wish I had have worked on the mindset more during that time and realized that all of those feelings and those beliefs that I had can all be rewritten and can all be rewired.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to your point as well on the, not necessarily knowing what you wanted to do when you leave school. I don't have kids. It's probably an easy thing for me to say, but I can't get past the sense that modern schooling isn't really helping kids. And actually, part of it, I think, is those kind of what I would call sort of life skills. And I think part of that is actually mindset stuff, and actually understanding how your mind works and how that affects how you feel and the actions that you take and all of that kind of stuff. And if people were learning that much earlier, can't help but think that we'd all be in a much better place. Certainly, I think a lot more people would be happier within themselves.
I agree. And I think sometimes it's often what we do come to later in life. It
Yeah.
might be even sort of in your 40s that you come to doing all of that, which is fantastic that we do. But I agree. I think if we were teaching some of these core skills at a much younger age and learning to recognize, different beliefs and behavior and patterns of behavior,
Mm.
probably all be a lot happier.
I think that's a nice place to finish, isn't it?
Yes, pretty much
Finish on
so.
a nice uplifting. Thank you so much, Lucy. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your knowledge and insights. And I'll link obviously your website and LinkedIn, but also the link to that quiz in the show notes for people that want to have a look at it.
Fantastic. So good talking to you, Emma.
You too.